Welcome to Whistler's Vital Signs, an initiative of the Community Foundation of Whistler that seeks to connect and engage our community as a means to gauge its overall vitality. Whistler's Vital Signs with your host, Kim Slater, starts now.
So today I am delighted to be speaking with two friends, each climate warriors in their own right. Claire Ruddy is the indomitable and tireless executive director of Whistler's environmental charity AWARE, championing innumerable environmental and climate initiatives in our community. Claire, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that intro and for having us.
Mike Douglas hardly needs an introduction. Local free ski god, filmmaker, MC, and chair of Protect Our Winters Canada, which is a nonprofit uniting and igniting the outdoor community to tackle climate change. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Kim.
I should also mention that both of you have far more radio and podcast experience than I do, so I'm just going to sit here and let you kind of run this thing. Is that all right?
It's all good. We'll just have a fun conversation here.
So today's conversation on climate change is incredibly well timed. It's September 20th, and it kicks off a week of climate actions beginning with a worldwide strike. In 150 countries, including Canada, tens of thousands of young people are going to begin marching today and throughout the week to demand immediate action to end climate change. Greta Thunberg, a 16-year-old student from Sweden, is one of the faces of this movement, but she's not alone in calling for swift, decisive action on the climate crisis. Have either of you had a chance to listen to any of Greta's speeches or talks? I'm wondering what it is about her message, or more broadly, this message coming from young people, that is so powerful. Maybe Claire, do you want to start?
Yeah, I saw a presentation by her last week, and the key message that stuck with me was, you know, she was receiving all of this praise from senators, and she's like, I don't want your admiration, I want your action. And I was like, yes, that's a nail on the head right there. From somebody who has gained so much momentum and really raised the profile of this issue, I think that to keep bringing it back to the call for action at the most kind of basic level is really great to hear, and also the fact that she's reached so many new people. This all started with her sitting outside the Houses of Parliament on a Friday at school in Sweden, and look at where she is now. The cover of Time magazine. She just got nominated Man of the Year by GQ. That is what brings climate change into the mainstream consciousness, and that's what it's going to take to kind of address this issue. Is for everyone to be involved because we're all in it together.
Yeah, I mean, Greta is incredibly blunt with the way she communicates, and it's very fresh, because especially young people often get caught up in the niceties. They don't want to offend people. They want to, say things that adults will feel good about. But Greta, she has Asperger's, and she says that's sort of her superpower, is that she just tells it like it is, and that kind of honesty is really refreshing in a time that everything has spin, and just to hear it bluntly. They said, could you please state your case in front of the U.S. Congress last week? Why should we care about climate change? And she just handed them the IPCC report. It's all right here, and it was just a brilliant gesture.
Yeah, she talks about how adults are basically stealing the future of their kids. She really doesn't mince words. How do you see this message resonating with young people in your world? You work a lot with young athletes, you're a parent. Do you see them weaving threads of activism into their pursuits?
Well, I see the young people have finally found a mentor, someone to follow, a leader that they can get behind. That's not an adult saying, hey, you kids, you should all get together and do this. It's just, and it all started with this single act of defiance, of her skipping school to go sit in front of the Swedish Parliament with her sign. And she was alone in the beginning. Yeah. But her conviction and authenticity showed the kids that, like, this isn't just some gimmick. And I remember, I have school-age children right now. My son is in high school, and he said when he first heard about it, he thought, oh, it sounds like just a way for kids to get out of school and skip school. But after, things started happening here in Whistler, he was like, okay, no, actually these kids really do care, and this has some meaning to it. And so, I've been fortunate enough to be traveling around Canada talking climate in high schools, and the level of energy this year compared to last year is incredible. The kids are fired up, and for me, that's so encouraging to see, because you can't look your kids or any kids in the face and say, we're not going to try and do something about this.
Yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit more about some of the work you're doing with Protect Our Winters.
Yeah, so Protect Our Winters is a nonprofit organization focused on the environment and climate change specifically, started by Jeremy Jones back in 2007. He's a pro snowboarder from California. And, as outdoor athletes, we were really seeing the effects of climate change firsthand. The melting glaciers, the shorter winters, ski areas struggling to keep some of the slopes open. And, it was one of those things, like, I know for Jeremy, he sort of had that realization that nobody else is going to fix this. Like, we kind of have to get on board with this. If the outdoors people, the people that love being out there and using these environments, if we don't care, the people that live in the city and go to the mall every weekend certainly aren't going to care. So he felt an obligation, rallied a bunch of his friends together, and here we are 12 years later. We started a chapter in Canada this past year, and one of our sort of signature programs is called Hot Planet Cool Athletes, where we travel around to schools in communities all over Canada and bring the message about climate change through the lens of professional athletes or Olympic athletes. So I literally just came in from a presentation. I was in Ottawa for the last few days doing school presentations there. We had a crew in Edmonton. We have a crew in Quebec next week. And just this week, we've reached 6,000 students. So.
Wow, that's tremendous. One of the other things that Greta speaks a lot about is this idea of climate justice or equity. What does this notion of justice or equity mean to you when we're talking about climate change, Claire?
Well, I think that when we look at some of the solutions that are being proposed around climate change, we have some hard questions to address as society. And when I say society, I mean at the global scale, the regional scale, the national scale, the local scale, around, are they accessible to all? And without getting into the depth of all the issues, how do we make these things approachable for people? How do we make them affordable for people? How do we make sure that people understand the impacts of different actions so that they can feel connected to that and they can advocate for that within their own families, within their own communities, within their own homes and businesses? And so I think when we think about this idea of the Sustainable Development Goals, it's interesting because when you look at climate change, it is the climate change goal. The other goals that it's tied to are equity, are land, life on land, life underwater, and so there's all of these interconnections. And I think the equity piece is something that is coming, but I don't think it's there yet. Like when we offer subsidies for electric cars, or we offer subsidies for people to do home energy evaluations, and all of these great actions that are part of the broader solutions, they're still only accessible to people who have a certain amount of kind of wealth behind them to be able to take on the additional cost. And so I think when I think about equity and justice, it's the people who have the least who are going to be impacted the most at the global scale. We know that. And, we have a responsibility as people in, air quotes, developed world, that we have created most of this footprint. And so we have to find ways to support everyone else who still has absolute rights to a very equitable and just society as things move along. But we have to kind of help them skip some steps because we kind of took some bad routes and put in some, the infrastructure and systems that we've put in place over the past decades. We know now that we can do better. And so how do we kind of help the global community do that?
Yeah, and so in some ways, it sounds like what you're saying is that, addressing equity in all sorts of different ways is actually kind of a way to talk about climate. It's one of the ways that is maybe even more approachable than kind of coming at people with, hey, we need to look at how we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, when really maybe it's about like, how do we enable people to have more security around livelihood and about, food security and things like that.
Food security. Are we able to insure our homes? Are we able to be resilient to extreme weather for episodes? I think that what has changed, Mike's talked about how the kind of momentum and feel has changed in the schools. I think what's changed across society is, and this was one of the things that I picked up at the Vital Cafe that we did on this topic, was people are way more in tune with how climate change impacts all other aspects of society. If we have an unstable climate, it impacts food production, health. We've seen the smoke here in Whistler in the summers. We've seen flooding. There's just layer upon layer. And so I think that this is no longer being seen as an environmental issue, but a human issue, a social issue. And, as a kind of environmentalist, I keep talking about the non-human aspects as well. We look at this from a very human-centric lens around what the impact is on us as people, but this also impacts wildlife, species, habitats, biodiversity, and so it's all interconnected.
Absolutely.
And I view it a little bit as, we talk about obviously the affluent, which is us. I mean, let's face it. If you live in Whistler, you're viewed on a global scale as affluent, and Canadians in general. We are the most responsible for this problem, but we also have the most means to fix it, to actually take actions today. And I hear a lot of the naysayers say, well, there's no point in Canadians doing anything because if China and India keep doing whatever they're doing, well, it's not going to do any good. But I don't look at it that way at all. I actually see Canada in a leadership position here. I mean, we're Canadian. We do a lot of really amazing things, and I believe in the people of this country, and I think that we have a responsibility to step up and lead the way. And Vancouver's got a goal of being the greenest city in the world. I mean, that's the kind of thinking that I want to see from this group. Canada's been voted the best place in the world to live for 4 years in a row or something. If we can't do it, how can we expect someone else to do it? So I see us in a leadership role here.
And to build on that, we as a community here in Whistler, we have 3+ million visitors every year. So, we have an opportunity to really lead by example, inspire, and kind of motivate people. And a lot of what kind of builds the momentum around this is this idea of, how do we connect people with the solutions? And so the more we can lead by example in our little tiny town, the better too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what sort of actions are happening here in Whistler? We've got students who are striking, students have previously striked. What sort of other actions are underway or on the horizon? You want to start, Claire? Maybe what sort of things, for instance, is Aware up to?
So there's been an evolution in this conversation. In 2016, a group of there was a community advisory committee that got together that was spearheaded by the municipality but involved all kinds of community stakeholders that put together a community energy and climate action plan that set out 140 plus recommendations for both adaptation and mitigation strategies that we can do as a community. I think what's really interesting is that that plan belongs to us all. It's for all of us to progress and find ways to kind of help implement. It's not just for the municipality to do. And so, when I look at what's happened since that plan has gone in, there has been movement on kind of 4 key themes, mainly around transportation and trying to get people out of single-use vehicle, single occupancy
Which is
vehicles,
one of the biggest.
Which is one
sources.
of the biggest. Yeah, transportation. Over half of our greenhouse gas footprint here in Whistler is caused by transportation within the bounds of the community. There's been action on waste and trying to keep our organic waste out of the landfill because that, again, is a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions. There's been work on housing and trying to house people locally within the footprint of Whistler because obviously that eliminates travel, but it also kind of, builds vibrancy in the community. And then the other one is around a kind of adaptation strategy, which is the Fire Smart and wildfire thinning program, which is all about trying to manage the risk that we have in this previously logged valley where we have a high density of timber that, in our changing climate, as we get longer, hotter, drier summers, is putting us more at risk as a community. So there has been momentum on some of those kind of broader policy pieces. I think as well what's changed is there's a lot of more action in people's individual lifestyles. We're having a lot of conversations with people around the impact of our food choices. We know that, eating meat has a huge footprint in terms of the water use, the energy use, transportation, the impact of clearing land from, especially if it's forested areas to, fields for beef or all in various areas of the world. And so, trying to find ways to connect people to that action. And, it would be great if we could say, let's all go plant-based diet. But maybe for somebody, it's starting with a meatless Monday or being a weekday vegetarian. And suddenly we start to kind of re-evaluate our relationship with food and take on more and more. So I think that the personal action piece has kind of grown in understanding, and people recognizing that, through managing our waste, through food choices, through conscious consumption, not just of food, but of everything, trying to buy less, trying to buy intentionally, and thinking about the various aspects of our footprint day to day. There's more people doing that.
Yeah.
And I think we have to acknowledge the leadership we've seen from Arthur DeJong as well at Whistler Blackcomb, because Whistler Blackcomb is really, they're the biggest show in town, right? They have the 2+ million visitors a year that go up those lifts. And they've been named one of Canada's greenest companies now for, I don't know, but it's coming up on 20 years, I think, almost every year. And, the things that they do and the education they provide as well around those things, about their goal to be zero waste, about the microhydro power project that powers both mountains, essentially, biodiesel in the snowcats, the reusable cutlery and dishes in the roundhouse, things like that. Those are things that I think as locals here that have been here for a long time, we kind of take them for granted. But if you go and travel around to other ski areas, you see that it's not always like that. There's a lot of paper plates and plastic forks and all this stuff. So the fact that they're kind of the big show in town and have been walking the talk for a while is a great example for other places, I think.
Yeah, it strikes me that there's a real opportunity to leverage the power of sports as well as arts and stories to harness people's passion and unleash their creativity in finding climate solutions. Where are you seeing this happen? Are there some noteworthy actions that come to mind for you? What's the arts and outdoors community doing on the climate action front that you find really inspiring?
Well, with Protect Our Winters Canada, that's our entire foundation is sport, really, and using the power and the voices of athletes. We now have more than 25 world-class Canadian athletes on our program, from Olympic gold medalists like Kelsey Surwa and Ashley McIver to major artistic influencers like Ruben Krabbe or Bruno Long, photographers, professional free skiers, snowboarders, trail runners, kayakers. We're even starting to talk with hockey players right now. So,
incredible.
And where the power of sport really resonates is with the youth, and that's what we're seeing. So I just, was talking about the school talks I was doing recently, and my partner on that project was two-time Canadian Olympic mogul skier Phil Marquis. And the beautiful thing about Phil is he speaks English and French equally well. So we were able to deliver our message on our last little tour in both English in some schools and French as well. So, and in a way that kids, they're interested, because we work our stories as sports people into the narrative of climate and how we've kind of seen things change. And it seems to be working so far.
And I think the thing with stories is that the most important thing is that we share them. We always look at a problem and we expect the solution to be a straight line, and it never is. It's, the life and kind of progress is generally a winding path, and there's bumps and bruises along the road, and we need to share those and what we learned from those bumps and bruises, and we need to share what worked and what we were able to really kind of gain momentum on and implement quickly and have the biggest success around. Because I think when we have so many, when we're so kind of at capacity in terms of all of the different solution options, it's really focusing people's attention. We know that half of our emissions here in town come from transportation, so let's get out of our cars. Like there's these really clear things that we can focus on one at a time and start working on.
And I think the people running the town here in Whistler are very conscious of these things. Mm-hmm. But we're creatures of convenience. Mm-hmm. And that nobody likes to do something that maybe you've done for a long time and all of a sudden becomes inconvenient. And there's always some pain to that. And there's going to be some pain if we want to transition to a renewable energy culture. And but at a certain point, you just have to you got to go for it and have hope that the leaders have enough strength to sort of stand up and say and believe that this is the right thing to do. And I think we're starting to see that now.
Yeah, I think it came out in the Vital Cafe. We heard some of the turmoil that people are experiencing. Definitely, folks flagged that there's this huge mismatch between the enormity of the climate crisis and the sort of relatively weaker responses. Lots of language around frustration and apathy and anxiety. It strikes me somehow that these are related, though, that this gap between action and affecting change on the one hand, and then people's personal, mental or emotional state on the other hand, that these are related. Claire, do you think this is a case of causation or correlation?
I think it's probably both. I think we're in a loop.
Yeah.
I think that I think this is where the role of kind of education and engagement is really important. I think that there is this, term climate anxiety, and I think that we need to kind of come together around that, but then move forwards. And I think that that is where the role of, when I think about the issue of climate change, there's kind of three tiers to it. There's the systems in our infrastructure that we are already built into or going to build. There's the policies and the practices that we have. And then there's the kind of community engagement, the behaviors, the beliefs, the values, the choices that we make. And that third part is almost the hardest part. Like the rest is, well, actually the policies can be interesting if you don't have bold leadership, but the behavior piece is going to take time. It's going to be ongoing, and it's going to need a really good level of understanding from people as to why we're changing and why we're changing together. It's not just asking one person to do something differently. It's why we're all in this together. But so I think that the education and engagement piece is what's going to connect people to the issue. It's what's going to help people understand how they can have impact, and then what the next steps and actions are. And then hopefully that we're succeeding and achieving, making a difference.
I think the enormity of the problem is a little bit what overwhelms people.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly, if I look at my own case, I'm a very reluctant activist. And, I've been aware of climate change for probably 25 years now. It's nothing new to me. It's something I found interesting because I was watching the glaciers here in our backyard receding and wondering, like, why is this happening, and what are the causes, and what's going on. But it really, I kind of stood on the sidelines until probably 2015, 2016, because I always assumed that somebody else was going to fix it. I always assumed that, the governments are going to take care of this. This is a huge problem. And then, they got together and they did the Paris Agreement, and all of a sudden there was hope. It's like, okay, the nations of the world have come together. They've acknowledged the problem, and they're going to do something about it. And then when we get the stats and the data a year or two later, like, really, we've gone almost nowhere. Mm. And so it was really at that point for me personally where I was like, okay, so it doesn't really seem like someone else is going to fix this. And if I'm actually concerned about this, if I'm going to sort of walk the talk, so to speak, I've got to get involved. And climate can be this heavy thing to, like, wrap your head around because it is so daunting. But I've found personally, at least, that by taking action and trying to change my personal practices and also speaking up has given me hope.
And I think that when you look at kind of the history of movements that have worked, there has been a grassroots uprising, and then the policy pieces and the practices and the governments kind of catch on, and it becomes more accepted, they can shift too. But the scientists have been telling us for decades that the climate is changing, and it hasn't been mainstream enough for governments to really put meaningful, bold, progressive actions and policies into motion.
Yeah, I mean, the politicians are going to do what the people demand of them to do. And I think, people that believe in climate change overall are concerned, but they're not leaning into it yet. And this is something that we really, with our school talks, we've really tried to instill in the kids that you have a voice. You may be 16 years old, but your voice is just as important as that 45-year-old banker that lives down the street in the fancy house. Like, you can call your local representative, your member of parliament. And we actually did that yesterday. We made 3 calls to 3 different members of parliament, and the kids were like, what? Like, the reaction from them was like, whoa, you're actually calling them? Like, can you do that? And we did, and it was amazing, because you say, hello, I'm so-and-so from Protect Our Winters. I'm here with a group of concerned young people in the last case yesterday. It was Lisgar Secondary School. And do we care about climate change, guys? Do we want some action? And then you just hear this roar of 700 kids behind.
Incredible.
And it was like, it gave me goosebumps. It was so cool. And in one case, we actually had a human on the phone on the other side. It was typically an answering machine. Mm-hmm. But the woman acknowledged, she was the secretary of one of the MPs, and she's like, message is loud and clear. Thank you very much. We'll be talking about this afternoon.
It's so powerful. It's absolutely the messaging that we're hearing from Greta and all those young activists, that our future is ours. We have to step up and lean into this, and that out of action comes hope.
I mean, one of the reason I get so much hope from seeing the youth rise is that they're not. It's really easy to attack an adult. I get attacked almost on the daily on social media. I've learned to grow a thick skin, because people call me a hypocrite. They call me all kinds of names and tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, offer up crazy alternative theories and all these things. It's just a barrage that never seems to stop. But it's really hard to look a 16-year-old in the eye and say, what you're saying to me doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And there's an innocence there, and they're not jaded by the what ifs and, well, if we do this, then this won't work, or there'll be job loss or whatever. They just see a problem and they're like, we have to fix it. It's simple. Like, why would you not? This is a major problem. Let's fix it. And at the end of the day, it's really hard to argue with that.
Yeah, Greta's really unequivocal. She talks about the existential threat of climate change in very black or white terms. If emissions are causing climate change, we must stop the emissions. So why don't we? What's stopping us here in Whistler?
I think one of the things that we have in society and as adults is that we have these preconceived notions that we have developed over the course of a lifetime. I think what's great about the youth movement is that they're asking foundational questions like, but why? Why are we doing it that way? What is the need that we're trying to serve? How do we do it better? I think, going back to your theory question, I think that when we look at things like nature and the interconnectedness of nature, it's not mirrored by our systems. Like governments, they work in silos. There are different departments that deal with very distinct things. There's a Department of Environment and Climate Change, whereas really that department should be integrated with every other department, and so on and so forth. And I think the same thing with the way that youth approach things. They don't compartmentalize an issue. They dig into it and they say, okay, but why? And what else does that mean? And how do we change that? Oh, and then we need to change that, and then we need to change that. And so that's what I've been enjoying about the conversations that we've been having with students here in Whistler, is the kind of the evolution and the exploration of all of the aspects of our community. And I think that they're way less worried about the barriers to change. Mm-hmm. They're way less worried about the existing pieces because they're not tied to them. And I think there's, as this conversation continues, and as we all as youth, the youth voice continues to rise, and we have to answer that in a way more proactive way, we're going to have some really good conversations around all aspects of community in terms of like, why is this the system? How do we do it better? And really, they're the main stakeholder now. Like the people, the young generations today are the people who are going to live with the impacts of climate change for the longest. So they're our most important player in this.
The older generation, they fear change. Mm-hmm. I think we all do to a certain degree. I'd be lying if I said I didn't fear some of the change. I mean, you become comfortable in your life, and you've grown up over decades, and this is how it is, and this is how it will be. And that realization that really, I mean, if we want to grasp climate at a serious level, like there's fundamental change mm-hmm. to the way we live and exist that is going to have to happen. I mean, I've through my ski career, I always loved embracing new ways of sliding or whatever. So for me, change is kind of exciting, but I know that for a lot of people, it's terrifying.
Those were both superb answers to a highly unfair question about how do we stop all the emissions, by the way. So well done. But certainly we know that there are lots of things that we can all do. So I'm wondering if you want to play a game, just a quick one.
Sure.
So Project Drawdown, a research organization that comes up with viable climate solutions, has a comprehensive list of climate solutions. And CNN picked this up and created a little quiz that I thought we could play and just do the first couple questions.
Okay.
So the idea is to rank the solutions they provide. And it's great because they've labeled each action to indicate whether they can be implemented by individuals, companies, or policymakers. So let's try the first couple, okay?
Okay.
All right. So the first question relates to food. We have to rank the solutions they describe as far as which would have the biggest effect on curbing climate change. So there'd be the most greenhouse gas emissions reductions related to these actions. We got to put them in order. So the first one is throw away less food. So just throw away less food. We have compost your waste, cook over clean stoves, or eat a plant-heavy diet. So which of these 4 actions do we think would have the greatest impact, would reduce the most emissions?
The plant-based diet is a huge one that from an individual level,
Okay.
when we look at the footprint of livestock, agriculture, dairy agriculture, those kinds of things. But also food waste is huge. When you look at where food waste, I think globally, I was actually reading something on this earlier, and some of these stats were blowing me away, so I brought them, and I didn't know you were going to ask this question, so.
Just wanted to put you in the hot seat.
But
I said I wouldn't, but I did.
Yeah, thanks. I'm ready. But it was talking about how the global farming sector produces 4 billion tons of food per year, but that we waste 1.2 to 2 billion tons, or 30 to 50% of that food per year globally. That's why my question was personal waste or system waste.
Right.
So, and in, again, air quotes, like developing countries, 30 to 80% of that waste is in the harvesting efficiencies and in the transportation infrastructure that does or does not exist. Whereas here in Canada, that waste is mostly from within our homes and the way we market food.
Right.
So in Canada, we have 2.1 million tons of food that we waste per year, which is enough to fill the Rogers Centre in Toronto 3 times. And it costs each family in Canada the equivalent of $1,500. So I don't know which option CNN
I heard you say plant heavy. I heard you say plant heavy first and then throw away less. So eat a plant heavy diet is your vote for number 1. What about you, Ryan?
Well, I think it's between plant heavy diet
Okay.
and inefficient stoves. I'm going to say just to
tricky.
throw it out there sideways. So let's go with those 2 as my top 2.
Okay, and if I'm going to be honest, because I have the answer here, but my first one I thought was eat a plant-heavy diet as well, and then throw away less food. Then I thought it was going to be compost your waste and then cook over clean stoves. So the answer in number 1 place is throw away less food. So that's the number 1 action.
Well done.
So doing that means taking 495 million cars off the road. That's the equivalent. Next is eating a plant-heavy diet. So we were really close on that, which is about like taking 465 million cars off the road. Then cook over clean stoves. So that's equivalent to removing 111 million cars. And then composting your waste is number 4. So that's like 16 million. So it's like an order of magnitude less, actually, as far as impact.
I think the interesting thing with this too is we're looking at this through the food lens, but there's also all these other layers around habitat and the cooking over a clean stove. When you actually look back at what that means on the ground, it's that there are areas that are completely denuded of vegetation because it's being used to create fires to cook food, and we've all just seen what's happening in the Amazon with huge swathes of the rainforest being burned to clear land for agriculture. So
Those are great points. Do we want to do one more?
Yeah.
Okay. So this next one, the category is homes and cities. So I'd say that this is at the personal, individual level, like within the home, but also thinking about at the municipal level. So the actions they've provided are design more walkable cities, install green roofs, switch to LED light bulbs, use smart thermostats. So which one do you think would have the greatest impact of those 4?
I'll go with the thermostats.
Okay. So your number one, thermostats, and then what do you think?
What were the other? So we had the walkable cities, and what were the other two?
Install green roofs
Okay.
and switch to LED light bulbs.
I'll say walkable cities second.
Okay. Claire?
Interesting, because here we know that the walkability would be huge in terms of our footprint, with half of our emissions coming from greenhouse gas.
It's going to differ
Coming
between
from transportation.
communities. Yeah.
It is.
This is at the bigger scale.
So if I'm thinking cities globally, I would think I'm going to go with that as my first choice.
Walkable cities. Okay. Number
and
one.
then I think the green roof thing interests me because that's one of those ones that has like an interesting feedback loop whereby kind of these really flat industrial roofs generate a lot of heat, and green roofs can actually kind of shelter. They actually, they provide insulation, et cetera, So that one interests me too. Those are my two.
So walkable cities and green roofs.
Yeah.
Okay. Mine was number one. I chose, it was design more walkable cities. I thought that was number one. I thought smart thermostats might come in number two.
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's actually switched to LED light bulbs as number one.
Seriously?
So that's something we can all do so easily. That's the equivalent of taking 54.8 million cars off the road. So that's more than double the number two option, which is design more walkable cities. So that takes 20.5 million cars off the road. Then smart thermostats is number three, and that's equivalent to 18.4 million cars coming off the road. And then in fourth place was install green roofs. And that's 5.4. Womp womp. Anyway, everyone's a winner here because we've all learned something.
And it's interesting too because I'm assuming that's like the global
so.
impact. So when we look at like this community, for example, again, there's been some good action on transitioning things like to LEDs, like all of the Christmas lights.
Yeah,
are now
True.
LED.
that's a
We
huge
actually
win.
we just finally have pretty much completed the LED transition in our own home. So
Nice.
that just happened last week. We finally were like, these old lights that give off all this heat have to go.
Yeah.
We had already done about half of them, but we kind of like stepped up and got the rest done.
Nice. Feels good. And I think I'll leave it there because I think we've really covered a lot of the different ways that action is happening, is underway, as well as more things that we can do. Certainly, I think supporting the young people that are taking some time out of their day is probably a good step we could also take on too. And we know, to follow Greta, she says in her TED Talk, the one thing we need more than hope is action. Once we start to act, hope is everywhere. And I definitely think of that when I think about both of you. So thank you so much for joining me here today, as well as for all the work that you're doing to inspire hope in our communities.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim.
And like all good things, this edition of Whistler's Vital Signs has come to an end. Please be sure to turn on your notifications and join us for our next installment. Whistler's Vital Signs is a podcast series developed to help distribute the facts and findings as contained in the annual Vital Signs Whistler Report and related programs. For more information on Whistler's Vital Signs, please visit the Community Foundation of Whistler online at whistlerfoundation.com. Whistler's Vital Signs podcasts are brought to you by the Vancouver Foundation, the Community Foundation of Whistler, and 101.5 Whistler FM.